Dear students, welcome to this lecture. Today, my topic for deliberation is effects of colonial administration on state formation in post-colonial states. The main objectives for this lecture are understanding the concept of post-colonialism, understanding the transition from decolonization to post-colonialism, understanding the subjects of post-colonialism, shed light into 3 case studies: India, Botswana, Zambia, understanding the effects of post-colonialism from a broader perspective. First, let's start with the introduction. Post-colonialism, an influential academic discipline, critically examines the enduring cultural, political, and economic impacts of colonialism and imperialism, focusing on the exploitation and control of colonized people and their lands. The genesis of this field dates back to the 1960s, coinciding with the publication of the works by scholars from formerly colonized countries who sought to unravel the persistent effects of colonialism. The critical theory analysis within post-colonialism encompasses the domains of history, culture, literature, and discourse, predominantly scrutinizing the imperial power wielded by European nations. Post-colonialism, functioning as an epistemology, ethics, and political science, delves into the post-colonial identity forged by decolonized nations. This identity is shaped by the cultural knowledge generated by colonizers about the colonized and the application of Western cultural knowledge to subjugate non-European populations. The central aim of post-colonialism is to dismantle theories employed by colonialists to perceive, understand, and know the world, ultimately establishing spaces for subaltern voices to articulate their experiences and contribute to cultural discourses. The approaches within post-colonialism are diverse, ranging from anthropological studies that seek a nuanced understanding of colonial life from the colonized perspective to deeper examinations of social and political power, relationships sustaining colonialism and neocolonialism. This interdisciplinary approach involves anthropology, historiography, political science, philosophy, sociology, and human geography. Subdisciplines within post-colonial studies explore the effects of colonial rule on feminism, anarchism, literature, and Christian thought. The term post-colonial studies is sometimes favored over post-colonialism to mitigate ambiguity, acknowledging that colonialism could refer to either a system of government or an underlying ideology. However, post-colonialism is not merely descriptive. It represents an ideological response to colonialist thought, akin to the relationship between postmodernism and modernism. The discourse of colonialism, epitomized by Ernest Renan's advocacy of imperial stewardship in 1871, portrayed colonialism as the extension of civilization. This ideological framework justified the Western world's self-ascribed racial and cultural superiority over non-Western cultures. Renan's vision outlined the perceived harmony among races within an imperial colony, asserting the regenerative role of superior races over inferior or degenerate ones. This colonialist discourse exemplifies the prevailing attitudes that shaped the era, with Western powers regarding themselves as masters and civilizers while relegating others to subordinate roles. Notably, Renan's ideas reveal a Eurocentric worldview that fueled the imperialistic aspirations of the time, emphasizing the purportedly divine order of colonial rule. Now, dear students, let's see from decolonization to post-colonization. From the era of decolonization to the advent of post-colonialism, significant historical periods have shaped the discourse around imperialism and liberation. Two key epochs stand out: the British disengagement from its Second Empire in the 19th and 20th centuries, and the decolonization movements in the 1960s and 70s, particularly in Africa. This later period witnessed the formal declaration of international principles and instruments of decolonization, emphasizing the language of national self-determination for liberationist movements in former colonial territories. The transformative processes encompassed not only political and economic dimensions but also cultural aspects, as marginalized populations sought to control over territorial boundaries, language, and history originally dictated by imperial powers. The term post-colonialism is occasionally extended to encompass the struggles of indigenous people globally in the early 21st century. However, its applicability is debated, given the interpretation of self-determination principles within the international system and the continued vulnerability of indigenous peoples within decolonized states. Historical imperialism spanning the 16th to 20th centuries featured distinct characteristics, with the 19th and 20th centuries marked by a different form of European imperialism. Post-colonial scholarship consistently explores the persistence of empire and the resistance against it throughout human history. The legacy of the Enlightenment plays a crucial role in the current landscape, shaping the discourse on imperialism and resistance. Enlightenment ideals and categories have been employed by both European and non-European thinkers to critique societal injustices and imperialism. The tradition of anti-imperialist criticism dates back to the 16th century, with theoretical tools from the Enlightenment influencing political and economic practices in the 19th and 20th centuries. Influential figures such as C.L.R. James, M.A. Zare, Albert Memmi, Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, and the subaltern studies group exemplify a complex inheritance, where powerful critics of empire draw from European social and political theory, while simultaneously critiquing it. The diversity of Enlightenment contexts and the plurality of concepts and ideals associated with it contribute to the nuanced and multifaceted nature of post-colonial discourse. Now students, let's have a look on subject of post-colonialism. Post-colonialism as a broad field of intellectual exploration probes through inquiries arising from the aftermath of imperialism. A crucial aspect of imperial history involves the formation of states, either through the consolidation of territories and political entities, or the dissolution of empires, ushering in new concepts of international order. Consequently, engaging with post-colonialism entails grappling with fundamental questions central to modern political thought. While post-colonialism encompasses a range of issues, it's particularly linked to a specific set of questions, with a notable emphasis on the relationship between imperialism and identity. Frantz Fanon, a psychoanalyst and a philosopher born in Martinique, provided a poignant analysis of the colonizer-colonizer dynamic in the works such as The Wretched of the Earth, 1961, and Black Skin, White Masks, 1952. Fanon gained prominence for his forceful endorsement of violence in response to colonial oppression, positing it as a means for the colonized to reclaim agency amidst the violence perpetrated by colonial powers. Despite Fanon's provocative stance, his argument acknowledges the necessity of moving beyond mere reaction and constructing something new. This involves overcoming binary oppositions imposed by Cold War geopolitical structures and addressing the micro and macro effects of colonial governance. Key consequences highlighted by Fanon and other theorists include the implication of both the colonized and colonizer in the horrors of imperialism, the need for decolonization on both fronts, and the challenge of overcoming alien rule over both territory and psyche. Fanon's work underscores the intricate interplay between imperialism and nationalism, a theme central to much post-colonial discourse. The pursuit of self-determination during anti-colonial struggles, as Fanon foresaw, often faced challenges in democratically institutionalizing within new formed post-colonial states. Post-colonial theorists, whether focusing on Africa, South Asia, or elsewhere, critique nationalism while also scrutinizing alternatives like nativism and romantic communitarianism. They investigate how European political concepts and assumptions about secularism have been used to categorize non-European collective actions and self-understanding along a continuum that aligns with modern European ideas and institutions. Moreover, post-colonial theorists challenge the liberal notion that extending existing universal principles in good faith is the solution. They question the inherent structures of these universal principles, pointing out that conditions for rights and liberties often rely on narratives of social or cultural development. This historical justification has been used to deny rights to those deemed culturally inferior or uncivilized, as exemplified by John Stuart Mill's rationale for denying Indian self-government. Now students, let's see the India a case study. The Indian subcontinent underwent nearly a century of direct British administrative control from 1857 to 1947. Following a period of more indirect political influence by the British East India Company that began in Bengal around 1757. The impact of the British Raj on the economic and political systems of the Indian subcontinent has had lasting effects that endure in modern-day India. This analysis focuses on the state of modern-day India, acknowledging that the British Raj divided British India into various states upon gaining independence in 1947. The British Raj marked a significant departure for the Indian subcontinent which historically comprised distinct districts with separate economic systems. The establishment of a central government under British parliamentary control in London unified the region, characterized by diverse languages, religions, social structures, and living standards. Despite political separation after independence, modern day India retains an active central government. However, the historical weakness of the central government, exacerbated by colonial legacies and post World War I regional governance, has hindered comprehensive economic development on a national scale. The British implemented a system of land tenure to raise finances, assigning property rights to landlords, village communities, or individual cultivators. This system, abolished at independence, left a lasting impact on local institutions, asset distribution, and political representation. The persistence of these colonial era links to development has been a subject of recent scholarly attention, with the ghetto implications for India's present-day development. The British also propagated European economic ideology, fostering capitalism and modernizing industries like agriculture. While this transformation introduced new production techniques, business practices, and labor market dynamics, it also influenced India's legal and financial systems. The British investment in infrastructure, notably railways, canals, and ports, primarily served commercial agricultural commodity production and military needs rather than the general population. Critics argue that this infrastructure investment termed part of the underdevelopment of the Indian economy, contributed to the persistent low productivity. British economic interests in India resulted in the extraction of resources, leading to substantial net payments to Britain. India's role as a major contributor to Britain's GDP influenced economic policies, favoring the production of land and labor intensive goods and shifting India to a net exporter of agricultural commodities. This economic orientation persisted after independence, contributing to India's continued reliance on agriculture and low per capita incomes. The British Raj also opened India to international trade and capital flows, significantly increasing its integration into the world economy. While this exposure led to deindustrialization in response to the industrialization of more advanced economies, India's subsequent withdrawal from the world economy post-independence had mixed effects. Economic reforms in the early 1990s aimed to reconnect with the global economy, highlighting the complex relationship between openness and development. In summary, the impact of British imperialism on the Indian subcontinent had enduring consequences, with both positive and negative legacies. Positive aspects include the unification of the country, the introduction of modern economic ideologies and technology, and increased trade opportunities. However, negative consequences such as weak central governance, skewed infrastructure development, and the extraction of resources have had lasting implications for India's development. The debate continues among scholars about whether the overall impact of British colonialism in India was more harmful than beneficial. But it is evident that the legacies of India's colonial past persist well beyond 1947. Now, students, let's have a look on the Botswana, a case study. Botswana's remarkable economic growth and political stability since gaining independence make it a compelling example of successful colonial rule. Although British colonialism had negative impacts, the administrative system they employed laid the foundation of Botswana's success. To understand this, it's crucial to explore the pre-colonial structure of Botswanan society, which consisted of 8 tribes, collectively known as the Swana. These tribes, ruled by chiefs, operated with a form of parliamentary rule, where the chief consulted an assembly of adult males on important matters. British colonial rule, initiated in response to geopolitical concerns, initially followed a policy of benign neglect in Bechuanaland, Botswana. The British aimed to maintain influence without significant financial investment. This policy allowed tribal chiefs to retain some local autonomy, a factor that proved instrumental in the post-colonial era. Unlike other colonies, Botswana's chiefs gained governance experience, crucial for the development of the post-colonial state. The British later shifted to indirect rule, formalized in orders in council in 1890 and 1891. These orders established a high commissioner with extensive powers, marking a shift towards centralized colonial administration. However, the British maintained a degree of local autonomy for tribal chiefs, contributing to the eventual rise of a fragmented multi-class state after independence. The British introduction of a legal system based on Roman Dutch law, coupled with an independent judiciary, set the stage for the rule of law in Botswana. This legal foundation, although not identical to British common law, provided a framework for the post-colonial state. The establishment of uniform laws replaced tribal customs, fostering democratic institutions. The British also entrusted tribal chiefs with administrative duties, mirroring the decentralized approach seen in British India. While Botswana lacked a formal civil service, the tasks of administration were carried out similarly. The Native Advisory Council, later renamed the Legislative Council, increased the chief's role in governance, contributing to a fragmented state model. Law enforcement in Botswana was entrusted to a native police force, overseen by a small number of colonial officers. This not only provided locals with security responsibilities, but also ingrained civilian control over coercive forces, crucial for preventing authoritarian rule. The post-colonial era in Botswana saw a gradual transition of administrative authority to tribal leaders. The emergence of political parties, particularly the Botswana Democratic Party (BDP), favored Western-style democracy. Post-independence, Botswana's government structure closely followed the British colonial model, with a presidential parliamentary system and an independent judiciary. The decentralization and fragmentation initiated by the British continued post-independence, with district councils replacing traditional gotlas. These councils, comprising both traditional chiefs and elected officials, played a vital role in preventing ethnic conflict and consolidating power at the center. The civil service, initially staffed by former British administrators, transitioned to native control over time, enhancing self-sufficiency. The police and military forces, though small, became competent and remained under civilian control. Botswana effectively utilized its colonial legacy to build a stable and democratic state. The decentralized, fragmented, multi-class model established during British colonial rule, persisted, contributing to Botswana's success as a sovereign nation. Now, dear students, let's have a look on the Zambia as a case study. The transformation of the British colony of Northern Rhodesia into the post-colonial state of Zambia reflects a trajectory common in sub-Saharan Africa. The colony, initially governed by the British South African Company, BSAC, and later by the British government, experienced a patrimonial, personalistic administration that marginalized native elites and overlooked infrastructure and institution building. This distinctive colonial approach, contrasting sharply with the Bechuanaland colony, shaped the historical context discussed here. The examination begins in 1890 when British rule was established in Northern Rhodesia under Cecil Rhodes and the BSAC. The British government, uninterested in direct administration, collaborated with the BSAC, granting it control over the territory in exchange for a share of revenue. This arrangement persisted until 1923, with the BSAC mainly focused on profit from copper mining, neglecting state building efforts. The minimal infrastructure, primarily a railroad to the Belgian Congo, highlighted the exploitation-oriented approach, prioritizing law and order over the development of representative government. Unlike Botswana, where native participation and legal system establishment occurred promptly under British control, Northern Rhodesia witnessed a different trajectory. The BSAC's policy aimed to limit representative government and native control, sowing the seeds of personal and paternalistic governance. When the British government assumed control in 1924 due to settler demands, it encouraged white settlement, further disenfranchising natives. The establishment of the Executive Council and the Legislative Council, excluding native Africans from voting until 1948, solidified white dominance. The economic focus on copper mining disrupted native tribal ties, pushing them to industrial areas. Tribal chiefs had minimal control, and British district commissioners influenced local affairs, hindering the emergence of democratic institutions. The civil service, military, and police remained under white European control, contributing to the absence of foundational institutions for a modern state. Post-World War II, the creation of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland in 1953 aimed at consolidating British interests but faced opposition. Native protesters led to shifts in colonial policies, introducing non-racial politics. The Benson Constitution in 1958 provided limited franchise to natives, but it was perceived as insufficient. The demand for independence grew, and Zambia was established in 1964 with a constitution emphasizing a strong presidency, continuing the paternalistic governance style. Zambia's post-colonial period maintained the neo-patrimonial state. The dominance of the United National Independence Party (UNIP) led to a lack of competitive party politics. The parliamentary system, established late in the colonial rule, proved ineffective. UNIP leaders, unprepared for leadership, sought to consolidate power, culminating in the establishment of a one-party state in 1972 under President Kenneth Kaunda. This system featured a paternalistic administration, patronage-based legitimacy, and party use for individual and group mobility, aligning with the characteristics of a neo-patrimonial state. Despite recent steps towards democratic rule, Zambia's governance continues to reflect neo-patrimonial features, demonstrating the enduring impact of its colonial past on its political landscape. Now, students, let's have a look on the issues affecting post-colonial states. In the 1960s, numerous Western colonial territories, including India, Indonesia, and Algeria, achieved self-rule after prolonged struggles for independence. However, the newfound sovereignty did not liberate these nations from the lingering influences of imperialism. The legacies of colonialism persisted in the retention of arbitrary colonial boundaries, the exacerbation of ethnic rivalries, the perpetuation of inhumane actions against minority populations, and the unequal distribution of resources. The transition from colonial subjects to independent states was often marked by violence and challenges as the new governments grappled with the lack of institutional structures, governance skills, and governing experience. Similarly, post-Soviet states like Azerbaijan, Chechnya, and Georgia encountered analogous problems after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Conflicts over borders, ethnic tensions, human rights abuses, and uneven resource distribution plagued these former Soviet regions, including the Balkans, Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. Post-Soviet governments also faced the common challenge of lacking established institutions, governance skill, and governmental experience. Key issues affecting both post-colonial and post-Soviet states include: first, boundaries. Over 100 new nations emerged during the decolonization process, many of which had not existed before colonization or were not aligned with post-colonial borders. Despite the arbitrary nature of these borders, post-colonial and post-Soviet governments often fought to maintain them, leading to boundary conflicts. Historical boundaries were invoked as justifications, such as the Libya-Chad conflict over the Auzu Strip. Now, students, let's have a look on the ethnic rivalry group status. Colonial and Soviet powers intentionally fostered ethnic rivalry to maintain control, often dividing members of the same ethnic group into different regions. This manipulation created intergroup rivalries that persisted into the post-independence era. For instance, the conflict between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots had its roots in ethnic rivalry encouraged during British colonial rule, leading to ongoing hostilities. Now, students, let's have a look on the unequal distribution of resources. Colonial practices of favoring certain ethnic or religious groups persisted in post-colonial and post-Soviet states, contributing to resource imbalances. The unequal distribution of wealth during colonial times in Sri Lanka, for example, continued to impact ethnic relations as disparities in education access led to enduring tensions. Now, students, let's have a look on human rights. The oppressive policies that colonial and Soviet ruling populations employed to maintain dominance violated the human rights of colonized populations. Post-colonial and post-Soviet governments, in some cases, adopted similar unjust practices to preserve their dominant status. Human rights violations including mass murder and genocide, were observed in post-colonial and post-Soviet states like Cambodia, Rwanda, Kosovo, and South Africa. Now, students, let's have a look on the lack of governmental institutions, skills, and experience. Repressive and undemocratic colonial and Soviet societies lacked internal structure for governance. The transition to independence left many post-colonial and post-Soviet states without the institutions, skills, and egalitarian thinking necessary for effective governance. This led to the continuation of repressive regimes in some countries, as witnessed in Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa. Now, students, let's finally conclude this lecture. The exploration of post-colonialism reveals a nuanced and multifaceted engagement with the enduring impacts of colonialism on nations across different epochs. The interdisciplinary lens of post-colonial studies encompassing history, culture, literature, and politics underscores the complex responses to colonialist ideologies. The historical periods of British disengagement in the 19th and 20th centuries, the decolonization movements of the 1960s and 70s, and the contemporary struggles of indigenous peoples illustrate the diverse landscape of post-colonialism. Case studies of India, Botswana, and Zambia exemplify how colonial rule shaped the destinies of nations in distinct ways, leaving a legacy that extends into the present. The persistent issues observed in both post-colonial and post-Soviet states, such as boundary conflicts, ethnic rivalries, resource imbalances, and human rights violations, underscore the deep-rooted challenges stemming from colonial histories. Post-colonialism emerges not merely as a retrospective critique, but as a dynamic discourse shaping contemporary dialogues on identity, power, and the ongoing pursuit of a more just and egalitarian global order. Through its critical analysis and interdisciplinary approach, post-colonialism invites us to interrogate and deconstruct the narratives of the past, fostering a deeper understanding of the complex dynamics that continue to influence our interconnected world. So, dear students, that brings us to the end of the lecture. I look forward to our next meeting where we can explore a new and exciting topic. Until then, take care and goodbye.